and gentlemen, I don't know about you, but I can speak for myself. Addiction has touched my family, and many consequences have come from that. Some have received drug treatment, some have spent time in the federal criminal justice system, some have lost their lives as a result of not dealing or actually not managing their circumstances and situations and the condition as a whole. Tonight we have with us Mark Scheeren, and he is the founder of Baldwin Research Institute Incorporated. He is also the author of the book The Freedom Model. And the reason why we have him on tonight is to discuss how one of the most overlooked issues during COVID-19 response has been one of the most debilitating issues for the nation, and that is addiction. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Scheeren, it's a terrific pleasure and honor to have you on tonight, sir.
Well, Ken, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Mark, am I being hyperbolic? Am I throwing out too great a spice in terms of this conversation? Has the lockdowns and the virtual fear factor of the mainstream media regarding COVID-19 put at risk hundreds of thousands of people's lives who are suffering from addictions?
Yeah, it has. We're looking at opiate rates that are now, they're estimating 42% higher than the previous year. We've never seen an increase in overdose rates from one year to another that have changed that much or gone up at that great a percentage. To put that in perspective, you have COVID that is, if you look at just COVID deaths, COVID alone, without underlying conditions, so we have a clean number of a little over 12,000 people have died from just the virus without an underlying condition. And then you have the lockdowns where you have an increase in addiction based on the fear and the anxiety and these sorts of problems. That's increased the overdose rate at the tune of probably by the end of the year, somewhere around 20,000. So just with opiates, we have a greater death rate, increase in death rate than all of COVID's clean number of deaths. So that's just, so you're 12,000 compared to 20,000, you see?
Now, there's some people who are sitting at home tonight, and maybe they're, justified in this belief, and they would say, well, gee, it's the addict's fault. I mean, why don't they just get help?
Yeah. Well, we have more treatment today than we've ever had in the history of the United States, and the rates have not gone down. So that's a point I make throughout my book, and that is that treatment hasn't worked in 70 years. And the number of people that get over the problem through treatment is not any greater than if they didn't go to treatment. So it's they can go get help, but it depends on what style of help they get. If they're taught that they're diseased and they're broken, if that's the model, it's highly ineffective because they don't have a disease. Addiction is not a disease. It's a preference for heavy use based on a person's personal reasons for using. And it is a choice. Now, to that extent, you make an argument, they might say, well, just stop then.
Yes.
Well, the problem is that we don't teach that. We teach them that they have a disease. We teach them that they're powerless. We teach them that the drug has power and the human doesn't have power. And that's just not true. But if you believe it, it becomes true. So it's a very complex problem. And a lot of the reason that addicts continue to be that is because of the misinformation that there's no way out and that they're powerless over the drug. And that isn't inherently true.
Mark, You may not know this, but if we come up with a vaccine, we could cure COVID and wipe it off the face of the earth. Why? I'm just being
Yeah.
facetious. That's not going to happen.
Right.
But why isn't there something? The pharmaceutical industry come up with something, some cure to help addicts overcome their addiction.
Well, they're trying, but here's the problem that you bring up, and that is that addiction isn't a product of brain chemistry. Addiction is a product of our likes, dislikes, desires, and the way we see the world. It's a product of the mind. And a lot of people, we're going to get into the weeds a little here, but the mind is not the same as the brain. And so we could come up with something that pharmaceutically, pharmacologically changes our brain tissue, but it's not going to stop a guy from saying, you know what, I like to get hammered. That's not going to change. You're not going to give him a pill that says, changes brain chemistry and makes him not want to go out and hit the crack house. That's just not going to happen, because it's how we see the world, and what we've learned is what guides us in addictions. It's our preference for heavy use.
Mark, I want to go in a different direction. It's regarding our children. Earlier, we were speaking with Michael Beatrice regarding the lockdowns. And I know that you've worked with all family members regarding addiction before. But why is this lockdown so devastating in terms of suicide rate, in terms of abuse and violence and murder or homicide for our young people? Why are they suffering regarding the addiction process?
The biggest reason that's being gleaned out, that we're figuring out now, this is a young problem, right? It's months long. But what it is the goalpost of a lockdown being constantly moved. In other words, people they realize they're in a lockdown situation, and then the press says, well, you're just about to get out of that lockdown situation, then we're going to extend it. And what that does is that causes a tremendous amount of anxiety and hopelessness, because now we're at a point where we're heading into a new year, and there's no end in sight. Now, I'm in New York, so I see how they constantly move this goalpost. And we live in a society that was a free society, and this is the first time that we have quarantined the sick, or I'm sorry, the healthy. So that's a bizarre practice. That's very un-American. It's in a free society. So I think that we're dealing with something that we haven't dealt with before, which is a lack of freedom, our rights being taken away, and, quarantining the healthy and moving the goalpost, causing hopelessness, anxiety, and stress.
Children have been groomed in the public educational system to knock on the guidance counselor's door, go talk to a teacher, go to a principal if you have social or emotional issues, and they will provide counseling for you. Is there a dramatic impact not having that kind of access for secret conversations with people in authority regarding potential addictions for young people?
Well, we don't know that. That's one of those statistics that we really can't know, because what if it's better that they're talking to their parents when they're at home now, right? So that's something I don't think we can really measure until after, and we can go back and start to survey these kids and say, did you like this better that you now were with your parents the entire time? So maybe we'll find that there was a hidden gem in this thing, where now we have relationships that are tighter. But we also know that on the bad side of the ledger, having stress, anxiety coupled with families that normally have some space where you can leave, maybe escape abusive situations, now you can't.
Exactly.
So where is the balancing act in a society there? I don't know, but I know this: locking people and taking away their freedoms doesn't work.
We're talking with Mark Scheeren tonight. He is the author of this great book, If You Suspect Addiction in Your Household or even in your life. You might want to pick this book up and then get in contact with Mark, The Freedom Model. And you can get it at Amazon. And as well, you can get in contact with him directly in terms of that. But let me ask you, first and foremost, for those who are sitting at home joining us now, and they're saying, addiction, what exactly, how do you define addiction? Okay. I think we may have lost Mark for a few moments. Tremendous book, The Freedom Model. And we do want you to pick that up. The Freedom Model vividly operationalizes the words of Nobel Prize winning physicist Max Planck. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. In the Freedom Model, the things you look at are you, me, and our fundamental ability to make willful, constructive choices and changes in our personal lives. Utilizing the power of free will in the pursuit of happiness, we actively shape our destiny. We welcome adaptive changes in our search for new and more promising ways to effectively engage in the world around us. Beyond powerlessness, mindless addiction, and extrinsic influences, we seek an internal focus of control and a life made from the stuff of our own choices. It is our ability to define what is right for ourselves. Knowing this definition may not find support from others. In the Freedom Model, the use and abuse of alcohol and drugs allows for three basic options: heavy substance use, adjusted substance use, and total abstinence. In reality, these options have always been there, and it is our right to choose the alternative best suited to our own self-defined vision of happiness. We decide how we wish to live our life and benefit when our choices derive from our voice within. I think that's a very amicable and appreciable way to look at addiction, and a model for overcoming addiction in our society. It seems that we have lost Mark. There may have been, and for those of you who are following along at home, you know how Long Island has issues with the internet and things of that nature. But we're going to do our best to have Mark come back, because I want to talk with him about the fact that COVID increases psychological disorders. And quite frankly, those psychological disorders are present without COVID. Getting the help that you need to deal with your stressors, those entities that concern you, is the most important thing that can possibly happen. Mark's with us. Mark, I got to ask you here, in the sense of what we just read regarding the Freedom Model, you are cavalierly looking at the fact that people have problems and they need to sit on the couch for at least 10 or 15 years before they overcome their issues and have dealt with their mother and their father and all of the environmental circumstances that have come around to impact their living. Don't you understand what you're saying is collectively a different way of looking at dealing with addiction?
Oh yeah, I look at you were gone there for a while. The
Yeah.
video feed was lost, so I'm just going to jump in with what we teach. Um, I I went through treatment in 1989, and I had a terrible experience. And because I was told that I would never be okay for the
Mm-hmm.
rest of my life, I would be somehow broken, and I would need recovery for the rest of my life. And I'd need meetings, and I was fragile, and all this entire model is predicated on loss of control and fragility. And I said, no, I don't accept that. It doesn't make sense. People get over this problem. I know people who were hardcore users and got over the problem. And then over the last 30 years, I've helped nearly 10,000 people come through our retreat, and they've moved on with their lives. So what we know is that if you teach people that they're always going to need recovery and they believe that, then they live that out. That becomes their experience. But what if you teach people that they don't need that and they can move on and they can be productive and they can let the past be the past, which is an empowering message that you really can let this go. And well, guess what? When you teach people that, it happens.
Mark,
People want to move on.
Mark, if I could just interject here, just one quick question, and I'll let you continue. But is addiction counseling a consumer service, or is it an industry in which people basically can take advantage of the individual who needs the services most?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. I think it depends. I think it depends on the therapist and the model. There are bad actors in every industry. And it is an industry. It's a $36 billion industry in America. And even with $36 billion in monies being spent in treatment, our addiction rates haven't gone down at all.
How
Now,
would you
go ahead.
define addiction?
Well, how would I define it, or how did they define it?
How do you define it, and then how do they?
Okay. I define it as a preference for heavy use based on reasons that are personal to that individual.
Mm-hmm.
And preferences can change and do change, and it's natural to grow out of an addiction. And we know that because over 91% of users, irrespective of the drug, when you factor in age, get over the problem whether they're treated or not. That's a statistic that's
Wow.
ignored. That's a statistic that is ignored. 96% of heroin users get over the problem. 98% of methamphetamine users get over the problem. 99% of cocaine users get over the problem. As you grow older, your preferences change and you move on. That's what the data shows from some of the largest studies ever conducted on addiction in the world. Now, how did they define it? So I define it as a problem that naturally can change, or you can facilitate change and move on from it, and a preference and a choice. They define it as a progressive psychosocial disease that once you start, you can't stop. Once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. You'll always be a minion of treatment. You'll always need recovery, and you'll never get out of the system because you're broken and there's something genetically wrong. Everything I just mentioned is factually incorrect and is mythology. But we've been doing it for 70 years, and we now have an industry wrapped around it that supports it. So you have one that's a set of beliefs that's not true, and then there's empirical evidence that says you can move on.
You say people can move on. You've proven it. You've gotten
Absolutely.
over 10,000 people through your program
That's
itself.
right.
The freedom model was designed for the purposes of dealing specifically with the individual and their personality and their choices. I want to ask you, what is the most difficult thing for someone to admit when it comes to addiction, and how do they deal with it under the industry standard and what the freedom model would deal with?
I would say if one of the most difficult things is the mythology of the disease or loss of control. If when people come to me, almost invariably they believe they lose control and that somehow they use drugs or alcohol and it's beyond their will. Everybody starts out that way because that's the paradigm of our society, our culture. That's been mainstreamed for 70 years.
Yes.
So that's the most difficult myth to bust. Now we spend, in some cases, we guess 2 weeks just busting that one myth, because once you bust that myth that they're actually choosing, then everything gets easy. Everything gets easy. At that point, they go, oh, and it cascades into a solution very quickly. But as long as they hold on to this, I am broken, I am diseased, I have a loss of control, and it's a battle, Mark. Once they latch onto that, we have to break that premise first,
Mm-hmm.
which we have all the data for, and it takes a little doing sometimes. Though, if somebody's been to 5 rehabs, if they've been in recovery for 20 years, in and out, and they're relapsing, and they're hearing this being pounded into their mind endlessly, that's the toughest part. But like I said, once you get through the data and you show them that it's actually quite easy to get over an addiction once you understand the facts that you choose, they cascade into a solution.
So
It's amazing.
you don't believe in the process of exchanging methamphetamines and cocaine and heroin for another drug, methadone. You believe a person can get directly out of their addiction altogether. Am I correct?
Yeah, let me explain that, because what you're talking about is harm reduction. Harm reduction has a place, but it's a place with a very, very, very tiny demographic, and that is the guy who is overdosing a lot
Mm-hmm.
or is in risk in a community where fentanyl might be present. It might
Yeah.
be a wise idea to get on methadone, right? It might save your life. But as a lifelong treatment, this idea that it's a blanket policy that we should have every heroin user on methadone because it's going to save us life, that's a lie. Okay? Because statistically, it's just not true that that's going to be beneficial as a blanket policy. Because what we should be telling people is the stats I gave earlier. Why aren't we telling every single heroin user that 96% of them, of guys just like you, meaning the heroin user,
Yep.
gets over the problem when we factor in age? Why don't we tell them that first, and then look at these other replacement therapies for the extreme situations where overdose is a serious risk? Because in a lot of cases, it's not. There's a lot of users out there that aren't in that pool that could just simply move on with their lives and quit for good.
You found in your studies that COVID has increased psychological disorders.
Mhm.
Well, someone on the left will tell me that those psychological disorders are shown out in addiction, quite frankly, and you have to deal with both of them, and the best way to deal with it is through therapy, right?
Hmm. Well, yeah, I think we're here. What you're talking about is a paradigm where, because we believe that the addict is weak, fragile, and because we believe that stress causes addiction.
Mm-hmm.
Now, mind you, there are many cultures where that's not the case and they don't behave that way, but ours does. So they have a valid argument. We are seeing an uptick in addiction because of stress and anxiety and these sorts of things, because our cultural paradigm, the way we think about it, is that these things cause each other. And and as long as that belief is held in our society, anytime we have a major crisis, we'll see an uptick in addiction. Now, what my model says is you don't have to have an uptick in addiction with anything, because we separate anxiety, stress, depression, trauma from the addiction, and then we work on each one individually. And that's a completely different way of dealing with addiction and the supposed causes of it. So it's a complicated question that you're asking. There's not an easy answer, because the belief is that they're causal and they're connected. So my process pulls those things apart and then deals with each individually.
I like the fact that you're using one term and you haven't introduced the other term yet, but those on the industry model believe that there's causation. You believe that there is correlation, and dealing with the fact that you are stressed is not an excuse to use drugs. Am I right about that?
Boy, let me tell you, you are the first interviewer, and I've done probably since the COVID thing 70, 80 interviews, and you're the first one that caught that. And that is a nuance that is really important, what you just said. We believe as a culture that it is causal, that you have stress, you will get high.
Yeah.
Now, if that were true, every one of us would be getting high right now. We would be drug taking zombies because life is a grind
Yeah.
for everybody. For everybody. So, but not everybody takes drugs. I mean, and we can even look in impoverished urban neighborhoods, even there where you have high rates of trauma, high rates of depression, poverty, unemployment, all these stressors that are packed all together. And yet, even people with high stress scores, you only have about 20% of them using at a high level. The other 80% don't. So when you look at this, you say to yourself, wait a minute, it can't be causal, because then you have entire third world countries where, heck, they can't even get clean water, and they're in
Yes.
civil war, and not everybody's getting high and drunk. So it's not causal. It is a corollary. And sometimes it's as simple as just a simple, um, it's okay for the guy to be on the corner selling crack, where on another corner it's not okay. That it might be a social norm. It has nothing to do with stress. It just has to do with maybe an economy. There's all kinds of factors, but it's not causal.
It,
It's corollaries and reasons,
exactly.
reasoning.
You
Yes.
talk about free will, and we have an election upcoming where there's a choice between state and individual sovereignty. You talk about free will. If someone has come to you and they have been indoctrinated that free will doesn't really exist, that choices have been made for them, other people have forced them to make the decisions that they made, how do you overcome that so that they can begin exacting a sense of overcoming their addictions?
Well, that's a complex question because it
Mm-hmm.
depends on the individual.
Yes.
Um, I think that first of all, when somebody comes to me, they have a bit of a more open mind than the average Joe,
Really?
even, even when they've been through 10 rehabs, because they know something doesn't jive. They
Mm-hmm.
know that their personal experience, they could have 10 or 15 counselors tell them, you're powerless, you're powerless, you're powerless. But then that same addict says, wait a minute, I didn't get high every day. There were days I didn't get high, and then the counselor says, "Oh, yes, you did.
Yeah.
Yes, you did. You didn't have power. You started right back up, didn't you?" And you say, "Well, no, not really. There was a couple of months there where I didn't get high at all, and there was this other factor. And then I got married, and when I had kids, I stopped getting high for about 3 months, and
Yeah.
and then and then I go, wait a minute, I don't think I'm powerless, but it's getting driven into them, right?
Yeah.
So when people come to me, I basically just say, I let them tell me that they have free will, because I haven't met a single person in doing this in 31 years that said I am completely powerless, and once I started at 12 years old I haven't stopped yet. That's never happened. So I just point to the self-evident fact, and that is there have been many times in your life, Johnny, where you haven't gotten high, hasn't there? And they say, yeah. And I said, well, then it can't be a disease, because you can't choose and unchoose cancer. You can't. You
You
don't get
can't.
cancer on right. You can't get cancer on payday, and then when the money runs out, the cancer tumor goes away. That's not how disease pathology works. So when you point out the real obvious, they laugh like you did, and then they go, "Oh my gosh, it really
Ex-
is a choice."
exactly. Your
Yeah,
freedom model is
yeah,
revolutionary. But just to go back to economics, you know that it is a serious threat to the nearly $40 billion industry
yeah,
of medicinal, pharmaceutical, and therapeutics.
yeah.
What has been their reaction to your proposed dealing, a way of dealing with addiction?
Well, in the first, I'd say 15 years, it was absolutely brutal.
Yeah.
They were they were absolutely dedicated to destroying me, my research team, my facility's reputation. They would do just about anything. And if I told you the stories, I won't put them on the air because they're so outrageous, nobody would believe it. But I grew to understand that anytime you have a paradigmatic shift where somebody breaks that glass ceiling, they poke the bear of the common model, you're going to be the target for a while. And I just said to myself, well, you know what? I'm just going to outlive these bastards.
Yeah.
I'm just going to keep, I'm going to keep helping people, right? Because that's what was important. That's all I cared about. I wanted to love people and I wanted to give them the right information. And that carried me through. And now they respect me. I don't think anybody would want to debate me because I would eat them for lunch,
Yeah,
because I have
exactly.
the facts on my side. So we coexist. They have their model. I have my model. And anybody that wants to be free and move on comes to my model. Anybody that wants recovery for the rest of their lives is entitled to that model. And I just hope enough people are reached that want freedom and they can know that it's there.
There are governmental entities regarding the substance abuse industry, and I'm naming them
Mhm.
industries because they really are self-sustaining in
Yes,
their
they
in
are.
their own. They pass off fear in exchange for financial support from governments and nonprofits and other entities, kind of
Mhm.
like COVID. Oh, but in
Yeah.
this particular sense, you have Medicaid substance abuse programs through government. What could they do to really help solve the addiction problem so that it reduces the price that taxpayers pay for trying to be compassionate to people in need?
Well, it'd be two things. It would have to, in the full analysis, it would have to be get rid of the war on drugs first.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not going to happen anytime soon because that's a massive amount of funding, hundreds of billions of dollars annually,
Mm-hmm.
um, so that we could get rid of the crime and the wanton waste of death that's involved in that war on drugs. And then the second thing is if they would incorporate the freedom model into educating what they call now addictionologists. They do is they teach people that want to help people in addictions the disease model, and it's simply false. You're teaching a religion. It's a
Yes.
belief. It's a religion. I said years ago that we're going to look back 100 years from now and this is going to be the addiction age, right?
Mm-hmm.
You had the golden age, you had the industrial age, you had, and you're going to have the addiction age. And it's sad. So we have to tell the truth and then get rid of the war on drugs, legalize drugs, and let capitalism do its magic, which it's how we became a free, amazing country to begin with. Um, and then regulate like we do with booze. When somebody drinks a beer, they know exactly what they're getting. It's regulated. It's safe. They understand what they're getting. You don't know that on the street, and that's what's killing kids.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a three-prong approach like that, but we're talking about a massive shift in society. So what I do, I think we start with the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, which is the freedom model, catching the people before they're dead
Yep.
and saying, there's a way out. And then we backpedal from there to legalization, getting rid of the war on drugs, and going from there. That's probably not going to happen in my lifetime, but that's where we got to get to.
Mark Scheeren, the founder of Baldwin Research Institute, at the Freedom Model. And if there's someone who's watching you tonight or on our Places YouTube channel and BitChute or Facebook or whatever social media that is being shared upon, if someone right now, it looks like they got their life together, everything's okay, that's what they're showing the rest of the world, but deep inside, they're snorting, smoking a little thing here, drinking a little drinky drink, more than just social drinking. What can they do to get in contact with you and get the real help that they need?
Well, if you're a lot of people are on Facebook, just go to the Freedom Model page and then private message us. you don't have to post publicly. Just go onto the private message button and private message us. And tomorrow morning, I guarantee there'll be me or Michelle or Steven or Ryan, one of my team, will answer you directly. The other thing that you can do is call us tomorrow morning at 888-424-2626. That's our crisis line. I'll say it again, 888-424-2626. And then, of course, they can get the Freedom Model for free, by the way, for anybody that I do a podcast with or like this or a national show. They can go to thefreedommodel.org. And then when they order the book, they use coupon code FREEDOM100. That's the word freedom and then the numerals 100. So Freedom 100, one word. And that's what you would put in at checkout when you get the digital copy of our book. And you can get it for free. So you have a solution for free. We give it away.
Wow. Listen, I hope that your bottle is adopted and used in substance abuse. Let me just be frank. I disdain pastors that preach causation versus correlation. And I believe that you're right. Free will doesn't exist on causation. Free will exists when you know that you have the power granted you by God to make choices in your life to accept or to reject, to walk away or to walk into. And if you no longer have that free will, then you will never be cured of anything, addiction or disease or anything else. It'll never be changed. Mark, I want to thank you so much for coming on tonight, and I look forward to you coming back because I want updates on what you're doing with so many people around the country.
Well, thank you, Ken. It was really, really engaging, and you had the right questions, and that's rare in this business. So I'm impressed. It's good. I'd love to come back on.
Thank you so much, Mark. Ladies and gentlemen, right. Mark Scheeren, get the Freedom book now. Get it now. Ladies and gentlemen, you got the holidays coming up. Let's stop playing this game. You know who in your family need this. And some of you who are watching right now need this. But some of you know, and you invite them to the barbecues. You go to parties with them, and they're just the most social people. You just love them. They're so much fun. And yet they are suffering painfully for your entertainment value. Go to Mark's Facebook page, direct message him, get the help that you need, follow him so that you might be able to get the book, Freedom 100. It's a code that you put in if you go to his website. Get the book. You have free will. You can do all things through Christ Jesus because he strengthens you. We'll be back, ladies and gentlemen, with more of the best in urban conservative talk. Yes, you are watching the Exceptional Conservative Show. I happen to be the exceptional one, Kevin Clinton. I'm also president of TECN TV. This is Open Heart Closed Case Night in remembrance of my daughter, Shanice Milton, who was killed on the streets of Washington, D.C., a journalist who was coming home from covering a story and was a victim of violence in the city. Listen, the best in urban conservative news, talk, and movies, we are. We are a republic and not a democracy. And in addition to that, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back with more of the best right after this. Suicide is not a real option.